All right. Hi, everybody. Katie Longhauser with Virtually Yours, and I'm very excited. Welcome back to Confessions of a Business Owner. And we have a fellow business owner on with us today, a very dear friend and someone I love, but also somebody who is highly intelligent and very talented, Victoria Cooper. So I will let Victoria introduce herself and share what she does.
Katie, thank you
Hi.
so much for having me on. It's nice to be here and connecting with everybody that you're connected with. So I'm Victoria. I am a licensed professional counselor and a licensed behavioral specialist. I own a practice called the Consulting Firm, and we are all about making leaders just better with their wellness, with their mental health, with their teams, and just overall producing and promoting healthier work environments. So we do that through a variety of different ways. We do that through coaching, we do that through therapy, we do that through workshops, we do that through groups. Anything that can educate and support and help regulate individuals so that they can be better employees or leaders is what we do and what we love.
Yeah. And I think what you do is so valuable because, I mean, if you know me, like health is very important, right? Mental,
Yeah.
emotional, physical health is really important to me. And I know, and Mary knows, and you know, like when I am not my best self, I do not show up as the kind of business partner, as the kind of wife, as the kind of mom that I want to be. So I really feel like investing in your health, and health is physical, emotional, mental, right? Addressing that and being proactive with it, I think is very important for your well-being and the well-being of those around you.
So important.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah. So it's great to see Victoria because we often just talk on the phone. So seeing her, at face, it's like it's so fun. So much of the world that we live in is virtual, especially being in a virtual agency. There's very little communication that happens like in real time in person. It's on the phone or it's over video or not at all. It's like text messaging, right? And like so much of our world depends on communication through this, right? So which is why I would love to talk to you about communication, right? Just kind of the topic. So confession, like I am not always great at communicating, right? There are some days where I just want to shut off from people, and there are some days where I kind of stay in my head, and that doesn't make for a successful relationship. It makes it actually probably harder. It puts stress on my relationships. Am I right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And sometimes too, when you're in that virtual world, it is easy to disconnect because being in a virtual world versus having somebody face to face, it's just a completely different environment, different vibe, everything's different. So it can be easy to disconnect when you are working with a team virtually.
Right. And would you say it's okay to disconnect, or is it not?
When it's necessary, absolutely. But I think that it's going to be important to be strategic and intentional when you have a virtual team because connection does strengthen a team. So when it's almost like an out of sight, out of mind kind of thing when it's virtual. Because you are a team, you really want to make sure that you're, again, being intentional about how to connect with your team and strengthen your team in that way virtually.
Yeah, so which is kind of like leads to, we don't necessarily, you can be out of sight, out of mind, but that means you might also decrease the impact that you could have on that team or
Mhm.
within, that relationship, right? And that's not always a positive thing, right? So how can we utilize what skills can we lean into to make sure we're communicating effectively to enhance relationships, to enhance our work environments?
So there's a few things that you can absolutely do to enhance, communication and your work relationships. One of them is just being intentional about structure. And when we talk about structure too, structure is just what you're factoring in when you're interacting with others, right? And when we're factoring in things, you can also factor in fun things, right? So when it's virtual, it can be easy for us to just focus on getting work done and then logging off and disconnecting. Factor in things that allow you to get to know your team and support your team. So when I do staff meetings, I always start off with good news, fun facts, anything happening with any individual on the team to the point that we're even setting our own personal goals and touching base and holding each other accountable in the beginning of our meetings, where some people are like, I just started reading this book, hold me accountable at our next meeting to make sure that I finished it. I just started walking. Oh, I think I'm going to start walking too. So these are simple things that you can do, to help just even strengthen a connection and a bond. And so when you're setting your intentions to do that, you also want to make sure when it comes to just communication, you're conscious and you're intentional about, the things that you're going to talk about, whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable. Setting the intentions and then also verbalizing your intentions with others is something that can be helpful because it prevents any sort of potential conflict or people feeling, overwhelmed or thrown off based upon your communication style and how you present. So intentions are everything, and make sure that you set them.
Yeah. What you said reminded me of something my son's class does. And it's before, like, he's in third grade. And the
Mhm.
teacher, every day before they start their class for school, they sit in a circle and they talk about what's a boulder or a butterfly. And it's so simple, right? But it like does it, like you saying that, it connects those kids and they're a little bit more invested in their classmates, right? And what's going on in their life. Like, one boulder was my grandma's in the hospital, and one butterfly was like, I got to go to a baseball game with my family, like, so those
Wow.
kids are kind of learning more about each other. And that's elementary school, but I forget the value in doing that as adults, right? And
Yes.
building that into our work relationships. Cause you're right. Mary and I get on and we have a to-do list, and it's like, da, 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 right? Like get that done. And I want to do that, but I also love and care about her and investing that time in our relationship, but also the other members of our team. And we get so much in a productivity mode that it's hard to do, especially
Mhm.
virtually, because you don't have that casual, we're walking down the hall together to the meeting before we sit down and have the meeting, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that's really important. And sometimes, too, as leaders, getting an idea of how your team and your peers communicate, and also, too, just their level of comfort as well. So I know that there's one person on my team that's a little bit more reserved and she's not as forthcoming initially, right? So I know to just plant a little seed and offer some encouragement and a little bit of soothing to get her to open up a little bit more. And then when she does, everybody else starts to engage and talk too. So understanding your team and the way that they communicate or how they choose to communicate or engage is also helpful. And it kind of gets you ahead of the game when you're able to do that as well to build that connection and relationship as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, how they prefer to communicate is something that I think is important. We actually encourage that for our virtual assistants and our clients to identify their preference in communication, like their form of communication, whether it's through like Telegram, that app that you can communicate through, or email, or send me a text message. Like, my email's stuck up all day, just send me a text message, right? Like, knowing their preference so that communication can be successfully accomplished is so important, but we forget because we're so accessible, right? Like email, text, call, like rarely do we call, right?
Rarely do we call. Calling
I
is my
call you.
favorite. You and I talk on the phone. I am such a phone girly. I am not a texter. And when I am texting or sending emails, again, setting those intentions just in case people may misunderstand what I'm saying. I like to kind of bring it ahead in advance so people are aware of even possibly my tone, what
Right.
I mean, how I feel. I try to be intentional because it does take away when you're not talking on the phone.
It does.
You have to do it through text,
Yeah,
you
and the
know?
inflection of your voice, and if
Oh,
you're,
yeah.
yeah, being sarcastic. But I mean, today, getting on Zoom with you today makes me realize how important it is to see your face. Like, that's another layer that you miss when you only talk on the phone, right? Like, and so
Yes.
it makes me want to be intentional about us getting on Zoom or FaceTime. I mean, we've done FaceTime, but like Zoom's a little bit more clear. The picture's more clear sometimes. So
And I think you're just like still versus a FaceTime where we're like moving all over the
yeah.
place. And yeah,
I'm
so
gonna set you down.
less
Hold on. Yeah.
less distraction is more connection.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I can even just like, I'm smiling more because I'm sitting and seeing your face, right? Like,
Yeah.
makes me happy to see your face. So these are really good tips. Is there any other suggestions or recommendations that you would give to our audience or to anybody listening? And what are, maybe even share some, some wisdom that, you learned through your career or as a business owner, give us some wisdom that you've gained. Maybe that's outside this subject matter.
Yeah, I think preparing, and I want to specifically speak to leaders and business owners that have a team. I think preparing as much as possible behind the scenes helps build relationships as well. So I know we're talking about, tips that we can do when it comes to communication to strengthen relationships and teams. Let's think about the things that are behind the scenes. One of the things that, like you and I were talking about earlier, is making sure you have SOPs, right? Making sure that there's different things behind the scenes when it comes to just the format of the company and the business that you're running, so that your team can have clear instructions, and then it helps reduce and prevent conflicts when communicating other things, because specific instructions and how-tos are out of the way. So the more you structure and organize your business and your team gets a clearer understanding of it, the better relationship that you're going to have with your team. And then it leads to more opportunities to connecting and having those fun conversations that we mentioned a couple minutes ago, because all of the uncomfortable things are out of the way, or things that maybe would have not been explained properly if verbalizing or not structured is handled and taken care of.
Right. And just to clarify, SOPs, standard operating procedures, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So do you have an example of something that of a standard operating procedure that needs to be in place, or that, when one isn't in place, like an instance where that could cause a problem or an issue?
Oh, let's start with one that should be across the board if we're offering any virtual services.
Yes.
Background and appearance, right?
Yes.
Background and appearance, breaking that down, and talking about that, the way that your space should be set up when you're interacting with clients, as well as maybe tips on how to consult and engage with your clients or the people that you're serving, giving those specific instructions so that it's not just, a staff member feeling like they're being picked on or nitpicked, or maybe they feel like they might be doing something right, but it's wrong. When you have everything written out and spelled out for your team to understand, then it leaves less tension. And once they understand that, then we can make room for communication and discussions on things outside of that, right? So if I have a staff that understands how we are supposed to be conducting consultations, how our appearance should look when we're conducting those consultations, and they're following through with those things, then we don't have to have uncomfortable conversations, and we can talk about your walking journey, or the books that you're reading, without there being a level of tension there or discomfort because we had just had to have an uncomfortable conversation about this.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So at Virtually Yours, the first thing that comes to mind is when it's kind of like our acknowledgement rule. That's kind of when a client reaches out to a virtual assistant, and we like to say that at Virtually Yours, that communication will be acknowledged within 2 hours, ideally within an hour. And that doesn't mean the question that you're asking your virtual assistant or the task that you're asking them to complete will be accomplished in those 2 hours, but you will at least be acknowledged that you're heard. Because there's nothing worse than sending a message and you're like, did they get it? Where
Right.
are they? Right? As a business owner, you worry because if it's a task or something you need that's urgent, or you just want to feel heard. So Mary and I often say that, we want it to be felt that they are being taken care of, right? And so it's like that communication of, this is the goals for the weeks, this is what I'm accomplishing. And then at the end of the week, you're reviewing and kind of cataloging all the things that you did. And these are the things that are going to kind of roll into next week, right? So they feel taken care of and heard, and they're, the work that you're doing for them is valued, and they feel that, right? They feel the impact with it. So I love that you clarified that, because sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what our standard operating procedures are and what that would mean, but I'm getting too analytical in my head. I'm getting, I'm thinking too hard about it. So
Yeah, anything that requires just um making your team or your company be as uniform as possible and consistent with the quality of services that you're providing. Typically, when you write that out and spell that out so that it's consistent with the team, then it, helps strengthen the team and you know, it prevents conflicts when it comes to, communicating and
Right.
building relationships.
Right. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, I feel like communication is key, right? Communication, if you look at problems in relationships, often it comes down to a breakdown in communication, I feel.
Yeah.
And so whether you're not listening or you're not verbalizing or communicating the frustration, a question, right? And not being in person and being virtual, I think there is a greater burden on people to convey and communicate more than ever.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with that.
Do you work with many people virtually?
I would say it's about 50-50.
Mhm.
So, and then our staff is also part in person and part virtual. We have one of our clinicians who, we're based out of Pennsylvania, and we have a clinician who's all the way in San Diego. So all of our communication with her is virtual. And then we have, clinicians that are local. So some of the clients that we serve are also virtual versus, being here in person.
And do you feel virtual versus in person, is there a difference in the impact of the relationships that they have with your clinicians?
Um, I feel like we have great relationships with our clients virtually, and I feel like a lot of our clients still see results. There's just something really special about an in-person experience because you can just get a whole, sense of the environment, their body language a little bit more, and it helps just paint a picture, which then ultimately helps strengthen a relationship and your communication. So I think too, um, the way that our cameras are set up so that an individual can get as much as they can from that environment that paints a picture of them is really important. Hence, your background and just how you're in the camera tells so much more of a story than mine. Mine has just like a brick wall. You can tell there's a little bit of character there, but
Yeah.
yours tells a story, right? And so depending on our backgrounds, and I think today we have like people put those fake, I don't know, those like
Yeah. Yeah.
AI, I don't know,
Yes.
backgrounds and stuff like that. But there is something about, where you are and the story that it tells if
Right.
you're not able to connect in person. See, look, you have a dog, like there's I see the pup back there. So
There's
there's
Bernie.
yeah, Bernie is back there. So that also helps when it comes to conducting virtual sessions as well.
Right. I think that makes sense. And I could see where there's more vulnerability in the work that you do when somebody shows up in person. Like you can read them. Like there's body language is a form of communication, right? And so I think when we're virtual, you only see, chest up, waist up, shoulders up, like whatever. You don't see the way I might be turning away from you or whatever. Um,
Fidgeting your legs,
yes.
playing with your hands.
Yes. Like I'm
Um, I'm pretty in tune with people's breaths and when they are often relieved or anxious, I kind of watch that. So if you're not in tune with that, it might be harder to pick up virtually versus something, in person, but all of those things play a role. So it's not that you can't achieve that virtually, just having something in person is a little bit better. So if you're going to do virtual, make sure you're a little bit more in tune with those things when it comes to connecting with whoever you're connecting with online.
Yeah. And I think so, especially with the work that you do when working with a clinician for, mental health and all that stuff, I think that makes a big difference. I, I do think there is a greater level, again, of vulnerability that is probably required when you are in person and when you're doing that kind of work that is probably going to serve you better. And, you're showing up fully to be the more vulnerable. So I definitely think that makes a lot of sense. There are times where I wish some of our work and, with Virtually Yours could be more in person, like especially when Mary and I are doing like strategy sessions and we just want to have a big whiteboard and we want to be able to like, because I'm a like part of my brain is pretty creative and I want to like draw in different colors and you
Yeah.
can't really do that, like we can't engage in that way, but we can do a lot virtually, which, I'm very thankful for. But there is that missing of hugging, somebody and also just that energy, but I'm very thankful for our virtual opportunities. And then with the work that you do, like being able to see a clinician, telehealth, like whatever it is, I mean, it's pretty amazing. You can connect with people and support people across the globe. It's just pretty incredible.
Yeah, and it's really incredible because, we're expanding and we're allowing our brains to learn and take in more by connecting with people from different regions. So if we were in a space where it was like in person only, imagine the box that we're placed in, right? So working virtually and connecting with people virtually really has expanded our horizons to just knowledge and what people do and their perspectives and the
Right,
ways to serve. So virtual has a great benefit to it that, in person also does not have.
right, right.
Mhm.
Um, So with that being said, can we summarize again the 4 points that you made in order to enhance communication, whether in person or virtually, to maximize the relationships that you have, whether they're work relationships or personal relationships? What are the top tips that you have for us again?
Setting your intentions.
Intent.
So make sure that you set your intentions when it comes to how you're communicating with others and how you're building relationships with others. Um, One of them was identifying your team's communication styles or the individual's communication styles. If they are somebody that are soft spoken, if they're more vocal, if they're shy, you highlighted if they preferred email, text,
Right.
video. So identifying their communication style. We also talked about SOPs and how we are using that so
Mhm.
that we can, set the tone and prevent uncomfortable conversations from
Mhm.
happening. And there was one more, I believe, but I cannot think of it. I think those were the three that
Yeah.
we covered. One of them I talked about was just the consistency of meeting and how
Yes.
we meet, but we
Consistency.
talked about that. We
Yep.
talked about that
In the
off camera.
beginning. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think we did in the beginning too, a little bit. So, intentions, style of communication or method of communication, SOPs, and then consistency in communication. So those are great tips. So in
Mhm.
our world, it's you're communicating for sure at the first of the week and then summarizing your week at the end of the week, method of communication or form of communication, expectations and SOPs, I feel like those are very similar. So like
Yeah.
in personal relationships is the expectations, kind of the values that you have and, that you don't, just kind of, and then setting intentional time. I mean, my husband and I have to set sometimes like this week we scheduled a Zoom time and we talked for like over an hour. It was like the most we've talked
I love that.
uninterrupted for like it's been weeks just because kids and
Super
schedules.
cute.
Yeah, it was good. It was great. But so we are going to intentionally do that like every week, just so not just coordinating schedules, but setting time to talk. And it was
Mhm.
like, it wasn't in person, which was because of our work life right now, and schedule, but it was a just time where we were like uninterrupted talking with each other. And I think that's something that's also, we didn't talk much about, but uninterrupted communication.
Yes.
That's hard
Yes.
to do.
Mhm.
Because
It's
we're distracted, the dog, like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I get notifications popping up, right?
Do not be afraid to use your do not disturb
Yeah,
on your phone.
right, right, right.
Yeah. It
Uh,
is really great.
yeah, and preserve your peace, preserve and nurture those relationships so that setting boundaries, right? So
Oh, yeah,
these are
absolutely.
these are awesome tips. Is there anything else, Victoria, that you would want to mention or to cover? You are a very wise woman. You're very intelligent, and you have added a lot of value to our company. You add a lot of value to my life and with our friendship, but also your wisdom. So I really appreciate you sharing with us today. But yeah, is there anything else you would like to mention or to say before we kind of wrap it up?
just keep connecting. And if you have difficulty with doing that and building relationships, don't be afraid as a leader to ask for help and feedback so that you can be an example to your team.
It's a great point.
Mhm.
All right. So where can they find you?
You can find me at www.theconsultingfirmllc.com or The Consulting Firm LLC on Facebook or Instagram.
Hey, all right. All right.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so much,
much.
Victoria. All right.
Take care.